clawed by a giant eagle. A Datura and Cannabis report by Disco on Erowid.org in 2011. 4 of us, me, my boyfriend Ricky, Bevan and Jeff, were staying at a beach house in a relatively remote location in the west coast of New Zealand. We'd spent the entire day sleeping, chilling, running around and carving the beautiful blue waves. So we decided what better way to end the day than with a nice sesh on the porch. So out came 2 tinnies worth of weed, the bong and the lighters. I'd had about 4 potent hits when I felt nicely mellowed out and decided to stop there. We'd eaten quite a bit that evening. Lots of fresh fruit from a nearby orchard and barbecued fish, so our stomachs were by no means empty. Ricky brought 8 Datura seed pods with him, each containing between 80 to 100 seeds. Since there were 4 of us, 2 people would have to babysit while the other 2 could pop some seeds. Although I'm nearly 6 foot, being a chick, there was no way I could restrain any of the guys if the need came, so I was one of the seed poppers. Jeff had never done Datura before, so he was a natural choice too. Besides, Ricky and Bevan were more than happy to keep their lips around the bong and laugh their asses off at us. 7 p.m. I opened 2 seed pods, one for me, one for Jeff, and we swallowed down the seeds. Prior to this experience, I'd done Datura 3 times, but never had over 60-ish seeds in one sitting, so I decided I was ready to experiment with a bit more and explore deeper. 8 p.m. We spent the next hour talking shit and eating marshmallows with no clear effects setting in yet, so I popped another 50 seeds. Big mistake. Apart from the effects of the weed, I felt completely normal. I could stand and walk fine and hold a slightly slurred but coherent conversation. 8:15 p.m. After another 15 minutes, I started feeling increasingly warm. Despite it being a chilly night, my body was radiating a huge amount of heat. This is when the hallucinations started. I felt like I was sunbathing. Though it was dark by now, I felt the sun envelop my body and drizzle it with golden rays of warmth. It felt divine. Everything was warm, loving and inviting. Apparently by now I was down to my bra and knickers. My heart rate increased dramatically. I knew it was kicking in. 9 p.m. I was smoking a spliff which didn't exist, and dropped it, which I've read is very common in Datura use. So I crawled around looking for it, to no avail. I figured it must have somehow fallen through the floorboards of the porch, though that was technically impossible. I stepped off the porch and lay on the grass below, gazing at the stars. I felt like me and the stars were one. We were the same. I don't know why, but I particularly remember this feeling of belonging with these giant balls of burning gas. To me, they were tangible diamonds in the sky, and I was too. I could see for billions of miles into the sky. It was one enormous eternity of stars in patterned clusters. Although I was definitely hallucinating, everything felt intensely real. My mind felt normal, although my speech was slightly slurred, and my walk was a little crooked. I felt something crawling under my arse as I lay on the grass, so I moved and saw a pool of earwigs weaving in and out of the earth that was once under my bum. I hate bugs, so I frantically rolled down the slight decline of grass into the sand. This was the last thing I clearly remember. Everything else is as told by Ricky, Bevan, my faint memories, and the camera footage taken that night. This is also where things started going wrong. I felt insatiable thirst, like I was stranded. I was yelling out for help, but only a mumble of jumbled words came out. I wasn't making any sense. I spent a good hour playing in the sand, throwing shells and rolling around. I picked up sand with my hand and watched it drop. I was mesmerised by its sheer awesomeness. I vaguely remember feeling like I was in a desert, and I felt intense fear and paranoia. Nothing seemed safe. The sun still felt as if it was beaming down delicious rays of heat. I was crawling on the sand, thirsty, desperate. I remember hearing sharp, loud noises and feeling so shit by now. I needed water, I needed to piss, I needed to throw up, and I needed to get out of this horrible, desolate place. I could only see things that were around 10 metres away. Everything else faded into a bright light. I still have flashbacks and experience this at times. It felt like hours and hours had passed, but it was actually only 20 minutes. I don't know what went on in my head during that time, but it was frightening. I remember images of bright red giant bolts, far larger than a house. I've experienced this red bolt hallucination many times before. 30 metres from me, the ocean roared. I heard the sound of water and wanted to run towards it, dive into this pool of infinity and swallow water forever. Without warning, I snapped onto my feet and ran like a bullet, dodging obstacles which didn't exist as I ran toward the water. Ricky was only 10 or so meters away from me when I suddenly jolted. I heard heavy, loud footsteps behind me, going faster than me. To me, the water was safety. I was being chased, and the water was my only chance of survival. I managed to run into the shallows of the water when I felt sharp claws dig into my bare flesh from behind, and a force throw me onto the wet sand behind me. I must have thought it was a giant eagle or a vulture, because I kept screaming at Ricky, calling him a stupid fucking bird, and trying to grab his beak and hold it shut. I was moving frantically, trying to escape his grasp, but I couldn't. He lay on top of me, holding me down, for 30-odd minutes. My screaming had turned to tears, and my kicking and punching had turned into scratching and hair-pulling. I had very little control over my body. Everything just happened without my mind's permission. I was on autopilot. I was so scared, so helpless, so alone, and so vacant. I had no idea where Jeff, Bevan, or Ricky were. They vanished long ago. I called for them several times throughout my experience, but they never appeared to come. My mind was gone. Everything seemed incredibly real, and I found it impossible to separate reality from fantasy. Because as far as I knew, everything was real. Ricky carried and dragged me into the beach house, and held me up in the shower. I was an absolute mess, physically and emotionally. I could no longer stand properly, and I would sway from side to side, begging it to stop. The water burned. It felt like it was sizzling as it ran down my back, but I gave into it and let it burn and melt me away. I literally felt like I was going to drown the drain. I thought the grains of sand being washed off my skin were pieces of me, swirling down, being carried by the burning acid water deep down into the drain, as if they meant nothing. I vomited 4 times, with 30-second intervals between each. I stressfully started talking about being literally turned inside out, and again, I begged for it to stop. I let it all happen with no physical fight. It was a hugely frightening experience. I was making funny groaning noises. My skin turned white, my eyes were wide open, and my pupils filled my entire iris. I suddenly noticed Ricky in the shower, holding me up. He looked different to how I remember. Far older, and getting bigger and bigger the more I looked at him. I remember seeing my nose in the bottom corner of both eyes, which appeared to grow too. I could barely concentrate on anything, but his eyes managed to pierce right through me. Ricky dried me off and put me into bed. The entire room was spinning and turning upside down. Even though I had bathed everything out, I still felt the need to vomit. I was hanging off the bed, rolling around and singing to myself. The music I heard, which was all in my head, was the most complex, incredible thing I had ever heard. I thought of it like a skyscraper. Layer upon layer, jammed together to create this mind-blowing fusion of beats and notes. I can't explain how amazing it was. It was my calm in the storm. By now it was around 4 a.m, and I was over the worst. I was so exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I was incredibly restless, tossing and turning constantly. A figure appeared, and I talked to it. I was actually talking to myself, and speaking both parts of the conversation. I remember drifting in and out of reality. There were moments when I thought I was going mad, and other times when I managed to convince myself it was just a dream. I still didn't know where I was, or how I got there, but the feeling of threat was no longer present. I must have fallen asleep, where I had the most amazing dream, which can't possibly be real. It was pretty X-rated, so I probably shouldn't go into any detail. I remember reading a book in my mind. I knew all the words. Then I gradually woke up, but was still reading the book in my head. I had massive cuts and bruises all over my body, which were actually just minor scrapes. So yes, I was still having hallucinations. I remember everything which happened from here on out. I somehow managed to believe my mouth was on my forehead, so when I tried to drink a glass of water, it all poured down my face. I would drift in and out of reality and imagination every so often, but by now, I knew things I saw weren't real. The rest of the story is fairly boring and uneventful, but the main effects of the Datura lasted around 24 hours. I had difficulty understanding basic things, yet I could understand incredibly complex things in my head. Even now, 2 months after, I sometimes still see everything around me fade into a white light. As I said earlier, I've experimented with Datura before, but this was the first and last time I'll have 150 seeds. I'd enjoyed it in the past, but I definitely won't be doing it ever again. Although my account of what happened may not sound so scary to the reader, I cannot emphasise enough how truly frightening this experience was. I felt so incredibly shit throughout the whole experience and for a day or two after. Not only had I managed to make a total ass of myself, I could have very easily drowned as well. In the past, I've also done LSD several times. The thing I both love and hate about Datura is that I really couldn't separate reality from hallucinations. However, on acid, I knew I was seeing things that didn't exist. I'll definitely take acid again, but I'll never swallow another Datura seed in my life.